The U.S. escalating pressure against Venezuela by designating a cartel group allegedly tied to President Nicolãs Maduro as a foreign terrorist organization. But here's the thing. It's not really a cartel, at least not technically speaking. So this group we're talking about, Cartel de los Soles, is widely considered a loosely organized network of drug traffickers. The U.S. claims the group is headed by Maduro, but the administration has not provided specific evidence to back that claim up. Many Venezuelans began using the term Cartel de los Soles in the 1990s, referring to high-ranking military officers who got rich running drugs. Then the term was expanded to officials who were also breaking the law. So the word cartel in this case is kind of an umbrella term. All of this is just the latest escalation in the Trump administration's campaign to combat alleged drug traffickers in this region. So far, the massive military buildup in the Caribbean and relentless boat strikes against alleged narco-terrorists have killed more than 80 people. As for Nicolás Maduro, he is as defiant as ever, calling the U.S.'s latest move ridiculous. Let's bring in Will Freeman. He is a fellow for Latin American Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations. Will, so good to have you with us tonight. Talk to us about what is happening here, right? We have seen the United States make designations against cartels in the past. From your perspective and based on everything you study, what is different about this one?
Well, this is the first one that they've designated where they're actually saying a government, an authoritarian regime in this case, is itself a cartel. So you've seen the Trump administration assert pretty broadly the authority to define what is a foreign terrorist organization, what is not. I think, though, that, just as your intro pointed out here, the difference, the difficulty is that we know there's disorganized complicity with drug trafficking in the Venezuelan state. I wouldn't be surprised if Maduro is aware of it, even participates. And he was indicted with 14 other Venezuelan officials in 2020 by the Justice Department. But in the end of the day, this is not the Sinaloa cartel in Mexico. It's not one of the big Colombian cartels. It's not one of the big Brazilian ones. It's just not as important in bringing drugs, and especially deadly drugs, to the United States. So somewhere between 8 and 24% of cocaine that enters the U.S. passes through the Caribbean, passes near Venezuela at least, but we're not talking about kind of one of the big organizations that's most directly threatening American lives. And I think Americans see that. I mean, a recent survey, for instance, says 56% think that military action in Venezuela wouldn't actually do anything to stop the flow of drugs into the U.S. And honestly, I agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, given that we have seen most of it tends to come to the United States via land and the southern border. But tell us a little more about this group, Cartel de los Soles. Who are they? How have they operated historically?
Well, the administration hasn't really defined that for us. As I said, there was 14 other officials indicted along Maduro, several of them high-ranking military officials in 2020. And, persistent reporting from the ground in Venezuela about allegations of drug corruption. We know, for instance, that the Venezuelan regime harbors several Colombian armed groups, which are themselves, longtime drug traffickers. I'm talking the ELN, for instance, many bases in western Venezuela, some FARC offshoots also trafficking drugs through the country. So that's well known and established. And I'm sure the regime in Venezuela is complicit with that. But again, I think we need to differentiate in terms of scale, in terms of what drugs they're bringing to the country. And for me, it's the Mexican cartels that are really posing the biggest threat to us.
So when we do think about, though, Venezuela in particular, a gang-like militia that I think of first as one that has been widely linked to Nicolás Maduro is Los Colectivos. But that's not the same group here, right? I mean, who has more power in Venezuela to begin with? Is this something that is on most people's radar outside of Venezuela to begin with?
That's a great question. We also hear a lot of the gang Tren de Aragua, which is very significant. And, which I agree with what's been reported about the CIA assessment of that, which is that it's not a gang directed by Maduro or his regime itself, but certainly has been enabled by it, right? They created a context in which it could grow and then spread around the hemisphere. So, look, no doubt about it, this is a dictatorship that is very much intertwined with organized crime, which has used organized crime to enrich itself, to dominate its own citizens. But again, I think that we need to be very clear that there are drug cartels and then there are drug traffickers. And this is just, it's not structured like one of the big organizations that we see bringing deadly large amounts of fentanyl to the United States.
Yeah. So walk us through what this designation, labeling this group as a terrorist group, means big picture. I mean, does this in some way pave the way for different U.S. action in this area or steps that could be taken against Venezuela?
Well, I think the Trump administration, honestly, is defining its legal authorities as it goes, or what it understands as its legal authorities. I mean, I see this mostly as a rhetorical move, as an attempt to kind of turn up the heat on Maduro, make him nervous, try to get members of his inner circle to flip and maybe stage some kind of preemptive coup. I think that's the dream scenario for Secretary of State Marco Rubio, maybe for Trump himself. There's also I think the administration would argue a legal dimension to this. Now, we got to remember here that, of course, it's Congress, according to the U.S. Constitution, that declares war, right? The president's commander in chief, but it's Congress that ultimately is the only institution without authority to say now we're at war. However, we've seen the Trump administration invoke these FTO designations to strike the boats in the Caribbean, saying that technically we're in a non-international armed conflict. So they may extend that justification, say now that we've declared the Maduro regime an FTO, it's open season on military targets inside Venezuela. One other element of this is that the FTO designation allows the Justice Department and the administration to go after what are called material enablers of terrorism. So in that case, anyone who does business with the Maduro regime, now that it's been declared, or rather the Cartel de los Soles, but however far the Trump administration believes that extends, anyone who does business with that network is now liable to a ton of different prosecutorial tools, moves, sanctions, consequences. And that raises an interesting question. Have you heard of a company called Chevron? They happen to be operating in Venezuela. They're pumping oil every day. So do they close up their operations and hightail it out of there by the end of tomorrow? I mean, if they do, then I think, okay, we're seeing that this FTO designation is really paving the way for strikes, for war. But if they don't, then I think it's confirmation of what I said at the start, that this is rhetorical posturing. They're trying to, rattle the inner circle around Maduro. But if they don't get it, they're going to sit down and talk. And actually, we've just seen reported from Axios that Trump is considering or planning actually a phone call with Nicolãs Maduro.
All right. So much to watch. Will Freeman, thank you so much for your time and insights. We really appreciate it.
We thank you for watching. And remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.